Welcome everyone to episode 40 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts. Today I had Greg Rietwyk visit me on the podcast. He is an artist. He plays in a band called Press Club. He's also a recording engineer, producer, songwriter, and he does some video work as well. But obviously we talked about his production and recording and mixing in this podcast. The main things we talk about in this episode are focusing on making the recording process fun for his clients. We do a big breakdown of how he goes about recording and mixing, and he does a lot of live-based recordings in studios as well. So bit of a dive into what that looks like, and also the challenges of finding the next client and things like networking and how that helps and being in a band and all that sort of stuff. So they're the focuses for this podcast. So I hope you enjoy. If you could do us a favor and share this podcast around, whether that's directly in a conversation, in a DM on socials, if you want to share it on your stories, that stuff really helps spread the word of this podcast. We really do want to get it out to as many people as possible. And if you are listening to this on a podcast platform that you regularly listen to it on, make sure you hit follow or subscribe so you can stay up to date with each new episode. If anyone out there has any experience with Patreon and Discord, I would love to bend your ear about that. I'm looking at starting that up this year for What's That Sound. So if you have any experience of that and you'd love to help me out, please get in touch and we can chat. Otherwise, enjoy this episode of What's That Sound podcast with my guest, Greg Rietwyk. You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. All right.
Right on.
Greg Rietwyk.
Yes.
Take two.
Let's do it, Stu.
This has happened before, and I forgot to hit record on the this guy over here. So great audio engineer over here. Hire me. I'm ready to work. No, but welcome, man.
You broke the cardinal rule, which is always be recording.
Always press record. Tenacious D. Always press record. All right, we're going. Welcome. Thank you for being here, and thanks for understanding my fuck ups. But tell us about yourself, man.
So I'm a songwriter, musician, recording engineer, producer, engineer, all of those things, creative. I do video production stuff as well. And I think we're talking content creation, everyone is these days. I'm a content creator.
Yeah, I know. You have to be. It's like a pain in the ass. But anyway, sweet. Well, where did music start for you?
For me, it started really young, as early as I can remember. My sort of earliest memories are just being exposed to music around the house. And I come from sort of big family on my mum's side, lots of cousins. And a couple of them were musicians, and sort of seeing them as I was growing up, you kind of mimic what your older relatives and siblings and stuff are into. Yeah. So I just kind of looked up to them and idolized them and wanted to be like them. And that kind of got me interested in it. And I just remember sort of being a kid and like rocking around the house. I think I was talking about with a tennis racket. That sort of daggy thing. And my parents kind of looked at that and cottoned on, were like, okay, like maybe he might be interested in guitar lessons.
Yeah, great.
That was my earliest sort of inception into it. And that was in primary school. So started taking guitar lessons then. And then kind of followed that on throughout high school. Study music in high school, as an elective, whatever. And that was from then I started, finding like-minded individuals in high school and outside of that circle of friends, and then formed really funny bands. Really questionable bands, that's for sure.
That's it. We all did it.
Yeah, and that was sort of the start of me getting into it. But yeah, it was mainly just that inception of being exposed to good music as a kid.
And so what sort of stuff was playing around your house, and what were you listening to and all that sort of thing?
My parents were kind of into that, like, the late 60s, early 70s, mid 70s I sort of like, I guess it's like rock and roll, but not like heavy rock. It was more like, like Van Morrison, The Doors.
Yeah.
David Bowie definitely was a massive one. Creedence. Michael Jackson as well, I think was in there, some of like the popular stuff, obviously. Rod Stewart.
Love MJ.
Yeah. All that kind of like, some kind of daggy stuff, but still, there was definitely merit in it. I definitely gravitated towards Creedence for whatever reason, like that singer-songwriter, John Fogerty stuff.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
It is good stuff.
It's very hard to fault any music that is still like referred to these days that from back then, because it's like it had to be good to have stood the test of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, it's great. Like, I have those things where like I got into the Beatles quite a bit later, probably in my late 20s.
Yeah.
And obviously had heard heaps of their music and my parents listened to them. My dad was more like into hard rock, like Black Sabbath and, Led Zeppelin and Def Leppard and that sort of stuff. Mum was into pretty much like 90s rock, like Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam and stuff like that. So, but there was Beatles stuff flowing around and the Police, amazing. But it wasn't until I started to grow into understanding music more that I started to unpack that sort of songwriting,
totally
pop rock sort of stuff. So, but yeah, so funny. It's funny that it's just like upon reflection, then you go, fuck, of course it's good.
Yeah.
Of course everyone's talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason why it was so popular and has, like you said, stood the test of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think from sort of that, the moment where I could sort of start having my own musical taste, it was definitely like buying. Funnily enough, I didn't talk about it before, but my first record was Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill.
So good.
Sick record. Yeah.
So good.
Still,
flawless.
It kind of holds up still, I reckon.
I love it.
And then Silverchair, Frog Stomp.
Yeah, huge.
And then I started going down that sort of, what was in our own backyard, grungy. Yeah. Grin Spoon. That kind of like guitar-based music.
Yeah.
And that sort of set me on the path to, discovering punk rock, pop punk, Blink-182, Green Day.
Yeah.
Pearl Jam 10 was definitely one of the first ones as well.
Yeah.
It just kind of blew my mind, the sounds. And it was something that it was kind of on the radio a little bit, but it wasn't necessarily the most
mainstream,
popular thing.
I wouldn't say. Yeah. We're like some bits and pieces.
Bits and pieces.
Sure. I think we were really lucky because we're a similar age. I think we were really lucky with, and I'm sure people these days would say the same thing, but I think Triple J was just such a big popular thing.
Yeah.
And it was cultural. And I know it still is today, but in a different way. But, Big Day Out and like festivals were just everywhere.
Yeah.
And just that Australian rock music was something to really admire. And it was everywhere.
Absolutely.
For our age group, it was everywhere.
And it was also a thing that you could look at and say like, well, I started playing guitar. Like maybe I could do that,
Because they just they were us.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, Silverchair especially.
Yeah. I mean, that was sort of 15 years old, when I was watching them, and I was obviously a fair bit younger, but it didn't seem that far removed. So I was like, why can't I do that?
Yeah, 100%. And so did you notice, I guess, moving into like the production stuff and like songwriting and that sort of thing, did you notice those sorts of elements in music back then at all, or was it more just like intake?
I think I did start breaking it down at that stage. Definitely it was when I started to look up tabs online or start to sit and try and learn a song, because that was the main thing you wanted to do. You get a guitar and you start learning stuff and you're getting taught how to do scales and stuff. You go, well, that's okay. But, it's way more fun is chucking on a, Green Day record or the Silverchair record and trying to work out, how do I play this?
Yes.
And then that sort of definitely starts training your ear really early on. And I was fortunate enough to get into it when I was that young, because you're just absorbing and learning so quickly.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, I started to be able to isolate what was the different parts of the song.
Sure,
You start to sort of deconstruct it in your mind. And I think by doing that, I then was interested in, well, how did this actually come to be? Like, how does it get presented to me as a song, on a record. And I had this mini disc recorder that my dad bought, those little things that like were around for only a few years. And he had this little lavalier mic that came with it, little stereo condenser mic.
Yeah, cool.
And so I plugged that into my PC and I had this Cool Edit Pro.
Yeah.
That's still around, It's like Adobe Audition.
It is actually. Yeah,
it is.
They did buy that, didn't they?
It's the same thing essentially, but
it's very bare bones.
And I'd stick that in front of my little Laney 4x12 and record it into the computer and Fruity Loops and make drum loops and just try and put a song together.
Yeah.
So that was my sort of earliest memory of doing all of that and just trying to work it out. It was just trial and error.
It was. And I have a very similar starting point as well. It was like, it's funny you think about that. It had a record, like a microphone input on the front of the computer.
Yeah.
So that you could plug a microphone. It obviously makes sense for anyone that was using the internet back then, which was rare as fuck. Like I mean, yeah, I guess we started using it. I started using it in year 7, but we weren't using it to talk to people and things like that. So it was always like, oh, there's a recording input. I don't know what for, but plug it in and man, the sounds of like recording a guitar. It was pretty funny. Tuniest shit ever.
It was bad, but I guess it's that thing, isn't it? Like you don't know anything. No one's telling you anything, but I just looked at this like port. It had a little microphone symbol. I'm like, well, what happens if I do this? And lo and behold, it worked. And then I was like, okay, so what do I need to do to capture this? And I had a friend that was doing something similar, and he kind of just worked it out a little bit before me, or maybe an older brother had shown him or something. And and so he was like, oh, get this software and you can figure it out. You know,
cool.
That was my earliest memories of it for sure, and the curiosity. It just came from there, where I just wanted to experiment and figure it out. And
And so this is when you're a teenager?
Yeah, it would have been like maybe year 9 or something like that. Sure. So it was a little bit later on. And it was when I started just getting into my first bands. Yeah, where I was probably like, well, how do I record, like write a song and record it, or how do I, record that song that we made?
Because you just want to listen back.
You just want to hear it.
You just want to hear it. You don't even know like what you're listening for or anything. It was just like the excitement of, holy shit, we wrote a song.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to hear it.
I just want to hear it. Yeah. You want to be able to do, have the same experience that you have listening to your favorite bands.
Totally. And for me back then, it was like, it was even one more step removed, because we had this little cassette player that had a record, like I had a microphone inbuilt into it. We set it up in the center of the room, hit record, play, and then I would have to use the plugged in microphone to record the playback from the speaker of the cassette player to get it into the computer so that I could listen to it as an MP3.
Hey, is that analog, baby?
It sounded so bad. It sounded awful, but I had it and I could burn it onto a CD for everyone else in the band.
Totally, yeah.
It was sick, yeah. So then when did that turn into you taking it more seriously? Like, was it gradual, or was it like you seriously said, I'm going to take this seriously, I'm going to start producing music?
I think it was definitely gradual, because it took a long time to have any confidence in that, but I think just the interest in it made me want to go and learn more about it. So I started studying at Box Hill Institute outside of high school, and I did that for about a year and a half, and kind of got to a point with it where I realized that I guess I had the confidence to say to a friend's band, oh, can I record you in a studio? And once I did that, I kind of had a few sessions like that and realized that I was learning like 10 million times more by doing than I was in a classroom. So it's kind of like, just felt like I was wasting my time a little bit, where I was like, but I can just go and get practical experience and I can start working now.
What did those sessions look like?
Those early sessions, I was recording at Salt Studios in Brighton.
I recorded there once.
And that was kind of cool, because they were doing a bit of teaching there as well. Okay. So they kind of babied me through the first few sessions, which was really usle. You kind of need someone like that to do that.
I mean, you could have broken the computer back then.
I think they were sort of worried that you would. And they had some good stuff there as well for the time, especially. And I probably just bumbled my way through it. took way longer than I probably should have with the bands, but we got some good results out of it still, like that I was pretty happy with and can still listen to this day, you know?
Cool.
And I think from there I started it was like a snowball effect where you go like, well, I've done this for this person. Can I record demos for you or whatever? So yeah, it was definitely probably pretty, not rudimentary. Like it was still all the same principles that work now, you know? It was miking up a kit. It was learning how that worked. But yeah, it was definitely that curiosity to just experiment. And I used those kind of sessions there to do it because I was working with bands that were also pretty new to it. So it allowed you the time to experiment.
And I think when you first start recording, it looks a lot like it did when we were using those really basic things. We just had more available to us. We had more microphones. We had more inputs.
Absolutely.
And it, we definitely wouldn't have been able to get the results that we get these days because we didn't know what's the best placement, what's the best microphone to use and stuff like that. And you had a guide by the sounds of things at the studio. But so it would have looked a lot like that. How does it look? Obviously a lot different now compared to that. And did it take long for you to start to understand those concepts?
Yeah. I mean, I think it did take a while to understand entirely what I was doing, but it was just that repetition and experimentation that then informs, you know, okay, well, if I do this, then I'll get X result, you know? I think these days it probably doesn't look super dissimilar, you know what I mean? It's just like you do learn how to do things at greater speed, you know, more efficient. Instead of spending, you know, 3 hours miking a drum kit, you might be able to do it before the band even gets in and have things kind of in a place, measure things out, et cetera. And I guess now it's just like I've got a bunch of go-to microphones and stuff that I'll go, okay, cool. This band is on a budget. We've set this time for it. I don't want to waste their time when they get into the studio. I want it to be a really smooth and fun experience. That's sort of one of my main things that I kind of come down to as well is I think because I've been in other situations where it's just been like 6 hours is spent, you know, with someone just hitting one drum. And I'm just like, what are we doing?
I know.
Everyone's bored out of their mind.
Yeah. 100%.
I just really try and avoid that these days. That's probably one of the things that I come back to is like, how much can I do before the band even gets there?
Sure.
Can I stagger people from coming in?
Cool.
I'll get the drummer in first and
it's great.
I'll already have, you know, everything run, patch done, everything. So that's sort of where I try and keep things moving and no one just sitting there just being bored out of their mind.
Yeah, for sure. And so what's the process, just to take it a little bit step back, is the process of, you know, I guess a new client and, you know, finding them and, you know, finding out about them and how you make those decisions in the recording process.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely all starts with conversations and talking about the goals and what they want out of it. You know, obviously trying to get in their headspace and understand what their influences are, how, you know, what productions they are, you know, influenced by or what they think is cool or what they like the sound of. I suppose if you don't know that, then how can you make any decisions really? So that would be my starting point, is just conversations and hanging out with them, going into practice, going to live shows, getting a vibe of the band. Sometimes they might think they want something, but they actually sound different than that, you know? And so I think it's that choosing a production technique or an approach that gets the most out of the songs that they have written. I think that's my main kind of goal all the time. And that applies to everyone that I'd be working with.
I think that's great. I love that. And I love, and it obviously involves conversation and, you know, I think, you know, obviously when you've done it for long enough, you've got enough of a back catalogue that people can check out, and there's a reason why they hire you. But, you know, you can have those conversations where it's like, I feel like you guys want this, but have you thought about this? And it's like, they might not have, or they might have. I actually have. I didn't know that was a thing that we would do or what that we would sound like and stuff like that. So it's a great approach to have, because you can stay open about, you know, what it might look like, and the slight deviances in, is that the right word? Deviations, wrong word. Deviations in technique, or like, you know, setup, and or like how we go about recording the song and things like that. And, you know, judging by the stuff that I've heard of yours, very organic, very sounds like a band in a room, and things like that. And so talk us through that process of what the session might look like.
Yeah, totally. That is a sort of sound that has kind of come to define a lot of the work that I do. That kind of is just a byproduct of the bands that I've worked with.
Sure.
Again, it's that thing, you're going to have a conversation, you want to suss out the vibe, what they want.
Yeah.
It's not always what I do. You know, I've definitely done some stuff that's not just a band in a room, is totally approached differently.
Yeah.
But, you know, if we're talking about that as a typical kind of scenario, a lot of the time that will be recording live, sometimes without a click track, and minimal overdubs, that kind of thing is what sort of gives you that sound.
Yep.
Almost treating, you know, the DAW as a tape machine in a way.
Yep.
Where you're trying not to edit too much or whatnot. If I'm doing a session like that and the band is requesting, you know, sort of more organic, less overproduced sound, I would normally then speak about studio selection, choosing a studio that has a appropriate drum room, appropriate setup, appropriate isolation, appropriate microphones, and headphone monitoring. They're sort of my priorities there.
Yeah.
Budget is always the defining factor these days. It probably always has been, but there's just there's no label money coming anymore.
Yeah.
There's no advances. Everyone's doing it kind of off their own back.
Yep.
Especially kind of at the level of bands that I'm working with. It's a reality.
Yeah, exactly. I think everyone can relate to that. That's listening to this for sure.
Yeah. Things aren't getting cheaper. No. Studio time is expensive. So that will be one of the things. At the moment, I'm working out of Wrangler in Footscray.
Yep.
And I've brought like a bunch of my own equipment over from my old studio build. In that sense, I've kind of got a selection of microphones that I know work. I've got the Behringer P16 monitoring stuff, so bands can just mix themselves.
Sure.
I think that's really integral in a live recording element. Just managing a bunch of headphone cues is really tricky if you've got, you know, oftentimes you don't have that granular control anyway of going, I can send out, you know, 6 stereo headphone mixes.
Yeah.
It's most interfaces don't have that.
Yeah.
So the P16 is really good because you can just, you know, it's Ethernet out to a brain. You can go, this is where, you know, each element is, and you can just do it yourself.
Yeah.
That way you don't spend the time where it's like you have to just go back and forth with someone and say, oh, what do you want? More kick, more guitar, less vocal, whatever.
Yeah, that conversation doesn't even have to exist. It's literally like, this is how you use it.
Yeah. And most bands intuit it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And they can listen to whatever they want to listen to.
And probably blows 80% of their minds that exists.
Totally. Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
And most end up really loving it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, like a typical, if I'm going to do like a 4-piece, 5-piece band, typical setup would be, like I was talking about earlier, I would normally try and get lines run for everything because most of the time I'm going to approach that kind of scenario in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
So I'll have the lines run for the drums. I'll have mics up. I'll have stands up. A lot of the time I'll be using a house kit, one that I've already got there. And so typical drum setup for me is, depending on the band, if they're like super raw or they want to have like a more roomy sound, more like Albini kind of room sound, I'll sort of go for like 40-38s on overheads, just darker ribbons, pick up more, their figure 8 obviously. If it's something a little bit more modern, kind of more modern punk or modern rock, I normally do 87s on overheads. And typically that's just like a sort of semi-space pair is what I've been gravitating towards these days. I've kind of gone through all sorts of different setups as you kind of do. I focus on overheads first. That's my approach. I feel like you're going to capture the whole drum kit there, especially if I'm using their Coles. Because they pick up a lot more skin. You get a lot more kind of low mid drum in there. 87s tend to be, you're kind of focusing more on just getting the cymbals, and that's why I think it suits that more modern rock sound.
For sure.
But yeah, that's normally where I'll focus, get them positioned right, get them sounding good. Kick drum in mic normally is M88, M88 these days. I just prefer the mid-range that you get out of that. It can be manipulated pretty easily if you want more click or whatever. Low end's good on it as well. And then outer kick, I normally use a FET 47. I just like that large diaphragm sub that I guess you get out of it. And it complements the 88 really well.
Great.
Typically on snare top, I'll use a Bayer M201 rather than a 57. It's just got a slightly nicer character, I think.
Right.
It's not as honky, more of a overall snare sound. You can kind of use that without a bottom mic a lot of the time if you need to, depending on how you've picked up your overheads. 57 on snare bottom. And for toms, I normally go for a 421 on rack. And then floor tom, that's where it kind of gets a bit murky, where it really depends on the drum, depends on the skin, depends on the tuning. Obviously, I'll try and fix it with tuning first if it's an issue. But I find myself,
floor toms are bloody
they're tough. They're definitely tough to get a balance with. If I'm using the Coles and the drum sounds good, the close mic isn't as important because it just picks up so much direct tom sound, and that's what I kind of like using those microphones for. But I found good results with like a RE20. 421 doesn't normally work on that. And then condenser mics can be really good, but like 414 is really good. But then you're sort of fighting that, the typical thing where it's like a floor tom and then you go straight from a floor tom into a crash or a crash ride, or it's just that total typical scenario.
And like you said, you don't want to have to edit as much and manipulate in post, to try and counter those things. If you can get it right on the way in and not have to battle that sort of stuff later, you're making your job easier.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that might be a conversation about trying to move a cymbal around, or just choosing a mic that has rejection and approaching it that way. Mic positioning. It's never going to be perfect, but if you can get the spill to work with itself, that's always going to be better. I will typically room mic, stereo room mic in that room.
And how, when it comes to recording a live band, when you've got the bleed from, guitars and whatever else you can actually hear in those mics, like, when you're compressing room mics and things like that to get that fuller sound for the drum kit, how does that affect with the guitars and things like that? Is it placement?
It depends on the band. That can be the thing that makes it sound raw and organic is the spill. That's it. Like, that has worked really well when a band wants really raw and organic. It can still sound really good, but then if you've got like a bass amp cranky and a guitar amp, kind of embrace that. Obviously you don't point it directly at your room mics because it's going to be more of that than it is of, the drum rooms. But that can definitely be the thing. And then, sometimes you take that away and you go, oh shit, that's what it's missing.
Lost it, love that.
So that I think is just, you got to use your ears as well, and move things around in the room if it's not working. Sometimes, especially like bass spill can be a bit uncontrolled, because you just get these like, standing waves, peaks and troughs of resonant frequencies. I think that's the trickier one. Guitar amp spill and stuff is a little bit easier to manage because it's just the frequency range it sits in.
Absolutely.
But that can sometimes be awesome. You got to embrace those things, and
I think
that's
something that only comes with time. And maybe if you've just been doing it that way and figured it out earlier on, then that's a thing. But it's like really, it's a good mindset to have to embrace what exists and not try and cancel everything out. I think it's something that I had to figure out over time and battle with, is like, you only have what you have, and it's great. It's actually better to capture what you have. Warts and all, because that's where you are in that point in time. And it depends on the music.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, if you want a really pristine pop track that has to eliminate that stuff, then do it. But generally speaking, for the style of music that, you know, you're working on, figure out how to make that work. I love that. Yeah. That's awesome.
If you sort of listen to the history of recorded music, that's what the magic is. And I think that's what's missing a lot of the time from modern rock and roll and stuff is like they don't have that sort of a little bit of chaos. It almost feels like, you know, you listen to the early Beatles stuff, you listen to the Stones, there's so much of the band interplay and spill and bullshit and in every microphone. And like you hear people swearing and all that kind of stuff. And that it's subconscious the way that affects you, I think. And you don't ever think about that as like that's such a mistake or it sounds like an engineering problem.
Yeah, you just
it
just exists. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. And actually, I would say it's the opposite. You come to love those things way more than
character
if it didn't exist. Like you wouldn't know that it didn't exist, but it's just, and especially when you're young, when you're a teenager and shit, you love that chaos.
Totally.
You love that, like, oh, they swore at the start of the song before the song. Like, it's just dumb shit. But it's so cool because you start to understand the character and the personality of those artists. And that is, again, something that's really important for us as producers that we have to capture.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, what I gravitate towards is that human element, the personality, and that's missing a little bit somewhat in modern music because it can be done so perfectly or, you know, everything is a little bit clinical and guitars are just DI'd and stuff, which I do as well. Like I do embrace that. I love that technology. But you miss out on having a room mic open that just picks up something like that.
The opportunity for that existing is gone.
Yeah.
So for sure. Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support and let's get back to it. Yeah, man, that's awesome. And so I guess talk us through maybe some of the things, the challenges that you face in an everyday session, or, you know, and how have you learnt to kind of avoid those certain things that might exist, whether that's in an actual part of the recording process or the production process or, you know, dealing with the people, anything like that sort of stuff? Yeah.
I mean, I think the main element that I come back to is just that like boredom, that staticness and people sitting around waiting for stuff to happen. I'd rather just keep things rolling forward. So I don't typically spend like ages just tuning a drum kit. It's like, get it there, get everything up, get the band happy, feeling comfortable, and then we'll assess and we can move things around. But it's that waiting around that is one of the biggest killers of just creativity and spark and excitement, you know. If you can keep a session fun, and this doesn't have to be for like a live recording session, this can be co-writes or whatever, or working on electronic music or something totally in the box. It's still that thing. It's like, can you keep this kind of creative play happening? Because it is a technical job, and you can get bogged down in that side of it where you're like, oh, hang on, I just got to like fix this plug-in, or like, oh, I'm being logged out of this. That sort of stuff is really, it's, if you can avoid that, I think that's my main focus is like, how do we keep this more in the creative world rather than the technical? And so I'm guessing, based on what you've said, the sort of stuff of setting things up before the session, having, you know, we haven't got to your actual in the box session stuff yet, but templates and things like that, that's how you can avoid those sorts of just awkward moments where someone, and you know, you hear horror stories all the time of just lack of communication from the engineer, where if you don't explain what you're doing, people just are sitting there and they go, what the fuck's this guy doing, man? Like, what are we paying? What are we paying for? You know, and it's expensive and people's time is precious. And that's definitely the main thing I've learned over the years is just like, how can I make this more efficient and keep it more exciting and more fun. Like it's way more fun to be doing something in a studio than sitting on the couch waiting for me to label each track. And you know what I mean? Like
100%. And like the excitement for someone walking into a studio for the first time to be met with that vibe killer thing of like you walk out after the first day and you're like, that was shit. Yeah. That's not what I expected.
All we did was get drum sounds.
Just taints your whole feeling of what a recording experience should be. So I love that. That focus on making it fun is huge, man.
We've got so many tools at our disposal these days where it's like we can be quicker. We can be more efficient. Like we're not calibrating a tape machine. Also, the band is paying for everything. So I'm just mindful of that. It's not 1984. They don't have 200 grand from Sony that they, everyone can go, oh, we're just going to hang out. And this guy's going to, this guy's going to calibrate the tape machine for 5 hours, but you're not paying for it. Who cares? Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where it comes from. People should have a good experience. So, not saying that it's always going to be a fun time, but there is things you can do that speed that up. And in my experience, that just creates a better experience for everybody. Yeah.
I love it. And let's move into the mixing side of things now. I guess I want to ask how much of your time is spent or like spread between, I mean, I know you do video editing and stuff like that, and as well as, being in press club. And so I guess where's your time split over all of these things? And
I mean, I wish I could have another 2 days in the week.
Yes.
Definitely the band it takes up a lot of time. Bands are hungry for your time at a certain level, you just there's so many things you need to do, touring, writing, production, especially when you're one of the people that, driving the production and recording side of it, and social media and video content and all the things. So that does take up a lot of time, but it also kind of gives me the flexibility to be able to do production stuff, on the side of that and record other bands. So it's probably 50-50, I'd say. And I mean, if I'm not working on the band stuff, most of the time I'm working on recording stuff or songwriting or whatnot.
Sure. Yeah. And then when it comes to mixing, where does that fit into the portion of, the production as a whole?
It's probably 30% of it, a lot of, I feel like to set yourself up for success, the engineering and tracking part of it, personally, in my experience, that's more important. You can't, you won't get a good mix out of a poorly recorded or arranged thing. Yeah. The arrangement is probably the most important thing. Like how well arranged is the song? Does it even fit on its own merit? But that's hopefully dealt with before you've even recorded it.
Yeah. Cool. And then talk us through, what mixing looks like. What are your, I guess, overall approach? What does it look like? And then what are you listening for and what are you focusing on when you are mixing?
Totally. My approach is I have a template, generally speaking, that I work off when I am tracking. Yep. And these days, mixing as I go. I really like to build a mix whilst we're tracking so that the song is presented as early as possible. I just think that's really key. Like you want to be able to hear the song that you're making as soon as possible, So once you've recorded beds and we're overdubbing, I've already got a drum mix happening. I've already got it sounding good because then you can make informed choices about tones, about is this all actually going to fit together at that point? If you're just tracking it all raw, it's just how do you figure that out?
Yes.
So typically these days I'd say, it's probably a 50-50. That session that I have at the end of a tracking session will be the mix. Yep. To some degree, you know. Yep. Sometimes I'll strip some things off and start again. But, if I'm happy with the drum mix, I'll just work on everything else, etc. And so that template sort of has everything bust, routed. Yeah. Some plugins inserted but bypassed. And, you do end up kind of following a similar pattern most of the time, especially if you want to have any kind of speed at this stuff. You know, you do really have to kind of at some point, there's a balancing act, of I want to do everything fresh and learn something every time, or I want to get this job done.
Yes.
And have it sound awesome still,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So that's sort of typically where I end up. Mixes, I don't love to spend, you know, more than sort of 4 hours on them at a time.
Yep.
4 hours is probably pushing it even, because you just burn your ears out very quickly and lose perspective. But yeah, I mean, typically I like to work also, not to say like I don't dig into every element, but broader strokes tend to work better, as in working on buses as groups. I used to do a thing, you know, this is such a typical like amateur engineering, you know, mixed engineer story, but it's like insert a, you know, you just go straight for a Pro Q or straight for an EQ, and then you low pass and high pass.
Exactly.
I don't really do that anymore. I'll do it on a bus if I feel like it needs a cut. And so I typically find myself, you know, like a guitar group, I'll just EQ it all at once. And only if I'm finding problems in particular parts will I then dig in and be surgical and whatnot. And that's sort of same for bus compression as well. Typically not on a track. Vocals are probably a different story. You know, you're definitely more aggressive on vocals. You know, you can.
And I guess it depends on, you know, whether it was live tracked with the band in the room as well. And like that would make your decisions different on mix and anyway, so
that like learning that whole faders up thing is just I mean if you're an engineer and you haven't tried that, you know, trying to do a fader balance first and then approaching it rather than going like I need to EQ this and make the drum sound fucking awesome. That's just such a fool's errand. Does it work already? Can you balance it as a song? Again, it's just something that comes with time, but what you don't realize is the opposite to that. If you are doing, you know, EQ moves on an individual track and stuff, like you're fucking with the phase and you're going to ruin the other without knowing. Totally.
And it's not your fault that you don't know, but these are things that you eventually, after learning over time and going, this happens every time. Why is this? And then you know, having to dig into it and find out, okay, oh shit, that makes sense. So it is hard because it's just one of those things that you have to eventually learn. You're going to fuck up. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to ruin your early mixes, and it is what it is. And sometimes it gives that track a vibe, but you want to try and eliminate those things from from existing, because you're going to make your life easier and not have to battle these things of like, why the fuck did this drum sound weird? Like, that's right. And it's just that thing. It also just speeds up your process when you're not then at, you know, close to the end of the process going, well, something's not good. Like it's not, I can't just get it where I want it to be or where I hear it in my mind, you know, that it should be at. I mean, I don't know about you. You're referencing a lot these days. I do, all the time.
Yeah. That's one of those things. It's like you know, it's that next thing unlocked when you realize how to do it properly.
Yeah, and I think the trap that a lot of people starting up think about referencing is you want it to sound like that song, and it's just you're using referencing as another tool.
Yes,
it's a tool to be able to focus on a specific element and go, how does their kick interact with their bass? Or like, why do the vocals sound louder in this part than the other part? And, you know, very specific things as well as the overall mix, and go, fuck, this sounds mint. I want to try and aim for that as like my North Star or whatever. Yeah.
I definitely use it typically as like a tonal balancing most of the time, rather than like individual elements, because that a lot of the time that just doesn't translate to another song. It really doesn't, you know. And some songs you might hear and go, fuck, that vocal is like really loud. And that just doesn't work for what this song's doing.
And it's so funny. It's so funny, especially these days when you listen to a lot of stuff that is popular, and it doesn't have to sound a specific way. And there was a great quote from another guy, Josh, who was on the podcast. He's like, when you know, first starting out, you think you have to sound like a specific engineer or producer or whatever. You don't. You're not supposed to, in fact. You are supposed to sound like yourself. That blew my mind. I was like, that's the best thing that's a mindset shift, is like, you're not supposed to sound like them. You are you.
Yeah. I mean, it's the most subjective thing, really. And it's art at the end of the day. It's music. It's everyone experiences it differently. Like you know, we find common ground to have a conversation about it, but it's so tricky because when you do start referencing, the immediate reaction is to feel subpar.
Yeah.
And that's probably a common experience for most people is to go, oh, I can never get it sounding like as good as that.
Yep.
But that is using it, I think, in the incorrect way.
Yeah.
You got to be careful not to fall into that mind trap. And I've been there, definitely. You know, I'll do it all the time. I'll
still
drive myself mad.
You have to correct yourself, right?
Like, it's never going to be that good. But then you also need to look at it. How much time did they spend on this? Who was involved? How much budget was there? What studio did they record at? Who mastered it? Like that skill level that might be involved in that song that you're comparing yourself to might be totally like just on another planet.
You got it spot on. And I think the other side to that is like, realistically, you should only be comparing your new mixes to your old mixes, not anyone else's mixes, and being like, have I improved in the way I hoped I would? And if not, where do I still need to learn? What do I still need to get better at? And that, you know, everyone's different. Some people don't listen to anything that they've done in the past, and I respect that. It's totally fine. But I think to me, it's really important that I reflect back on something that I did in 2015, something that I did in 2020, something I did last year, my last mix, all those little pieces of the puzzle, and go, what did I really nail here? And what do I still need to work on to get better at?
Absolutely.
And, you know, that's in the mix. That is where you can spend a little bit more time on something. Go, I think I need to work on reverb a little bit more, or, you know, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that comes from like a more of a constructive self-reflection thing rather than just comparison to something that may be totally unattainable. And it's not really doing anything for your own benefit, you know, your own self-worth. It's just making you feel like shit, really, a lot of the time. So
and you're asking the wrong questions as well.
So I think that would be my one little piece of advice is use references as more a point of, how much low end does this track or does a commercially released track typically have in what this certain frequency range, you know, how bright is it typically, you know, and you need multiple different types because there's so many factors and different, you know, variables in between that, you know. I kind of like to have a few references. I go, this is the brightest that I ever want to be. And this is like, you know,
darkest,
and in different styles as well.
Yeah, sure.
That's where it's useful. It's not useful as in like, how shit hot does this song sound compared to mine, you know? Sometimes it can be good for like, why does this song have more energy than my song? That can be useful, but that shouldn't really happen at mix reference time.
Totally.
That should be something that you're listening to in your spare time and just discovering music and analyzing music. I think that's the time to do that.
It's a great point. And I think another thing to that is like, the way I always, and I've probably said this a bunch of times, is there's always going to be another opportunity. It's not like that track that you're working on is the last chance that you have to do this thing. There's always going to be the next one. And I say that to artists about hanging on to songs and, I can't release it yet because of this and that and this and that. And it's usually bullshit reasons anyway. You're always going to get another chance. And when you have that mindset of like, well, I know, you just hope that you're just going to get better. If you keep practicing, you will get better at what you do. Yeah. And so like having that self-assurance should help with those sorts of questions a little bit more as well. Yeah. You know, why doesn't my kick sound the right way it does? I don't know. Just deal with it. Yeah. It's hard. It's like a full on battle.
It's hard to move on from it sometimes. Yeah. Absolutely.
What sort of, you know, challenges then do you find that you're seeing in mixes and things like that? Is there something that continuously pops up, or is it different every time? Or
I think it's probably different every time. Yeah. I think it has to be different every time, right? Because every song's different. The it's always, it comes down to arrangement most of the time. You probably had this experience where you go, why does that song just like, it's just killing it. Like it just works. Like I don't really have to do anything. And I think that's always, to me, it's just arrangement. You know, it might be the key that the song's in and all the instruments just bloom together and work and everything's complementing itself. The vocal melody just sits.
Love it.
I feel like that's a lot of the time when I'm like, it's a challenge, it's probably something earlier on in the chain. Or it might be that I made a mistake engineering. Like that happens. Something goes wrong, you know? But yeah, a lot of the time it's just the song and the arrangement and you're fighting that a little bit. But then you need to problem solve to work out, well, how this is a situation. It's not going away. The song's got to be mixed. How do I overcome this to a point that the customer is satisfied with? Yeah. You know, at the end of the day, that they're happy with and that I can live with, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where like if you can get it to 80% and send it to them and then get their feedback, because they're usually going to have feedback on something that you've done. It's rarely that you nail it on the first mix anyway. Totally. So if you can get it to that 80%, where the chances are they might not notice that extra 20% anyway, you're going to get feedback from them. You can end up doing those extra little things that you might need to spend a little bit more time on in the second revision. Yeah. It's faster. It's more efficient. You're proving to them that you can get things done. Yeah. You know, the worst stories I hear in that regard is I had to wait for the mix for 3 weeks. I'm like, why? Yeah. Why did you have to wait that long? Yeah. There should be no reason for that, you know, unless the guy's swept off their feet, guy or girl, swept off their feet for, but realistically. Yeah. It shouldn't just happen. It just shouldn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you can get that initial mix to them early on so they can sit with it and make informed decisions about feedback, you know, it's definitely, you can take a mix too far on the first go and you go, oh, this is killing it to me. And it's like, well, it doesn't fit with their vision. And so you're going to have to go back and undo all that or take it back to an earlier mix to be able to shape it that way. Yeah. I've definitely done mixes before where I'm like, this is doing everything I wanted to do for me. Sounds amazing. And then a band will say, it's too much. It's like it's too polished. Too polished is a thing that I get a lot.
That's really difficult, isn't it?
It's really tricky. You go, well, I don't know.
Unpolish something, that's really hard.
Like, I just made it sound good to me. They go, oh, it's too slick or whatever, which I understand that now. And then you that's another thing where it's like that I probably I didn't communicate well enough prior to the mix about what they wanted out of it. It's tricky. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, you know, talk us through, I guess I want to, you know, we've talked about the nitty gritty of recording and production and mixing and stuff. Talk us a little bit more about, you know, I guess it's very unique to you because you do all these different things and you have to spread your, you know, attention very heavily towards the band. But, you know, when it comes to your business of being a producer and engineer and songwriter and things like that, what are some of your, I guess we can talk to challenges because they're probably the more obvious things, you know, when it comes to running a business, I guess.
That's the hardest part of this whole game really, because like I think a lot of people didn't get into music to be a person that sits on emails, you know, half the week and contacts people. So, I mean, that's one of my main weaknesses is just being organized enough as, you know, a sole trader businessman that's trying to find work, you know. And I guess it's all network anyway. But I identify that as my biggest weakness for sure is I don't really know how to go out and get the next thing, you know. In terms of like running it, that's something that takes a really long time to learn in terms of like, you know, being good at invoicing and emails and communication. But yeah, I think it's just that, how do you approach the next thing or find the next thing? A lot of the time it's just based on someone's recorded with you, someone else likes it, they approach you. A lot of the time I find when I try and find something, it's very tricky these days.
Yeah, really hard. Everyone's so switched on to, I guess, spam messages and things like that. It's hard to kind of weed out when someone just wants your money or actually genuinely wants to work with you. And, you know, it's like it, and I've been in bands before, you're in a band, like you get people reaching out to you all the time. It can be really difficult to know when someone's genuine about, hey, I really love your stuff. I want to find a way to work with you. And how do you approach that? I
think the tough thing these days as well is everyone's so cluey about the recording industry in a way. A lot of people record themselves, and these days a lot of people just do everything themselves, or they're already working with someone that they've had a long-standing relationship with. You know, at I guess a certain level of artists that we want to work with, or I want to work with. A lot of people already are really working with someone else, and I don't want to go in and just try and cut a relationship down and insert myself, because that's not my place either. So I guess that is the challenge, I think, of how do you find new artists at a level that you want to be working at, that don't already have that 100%. Going on, you know, they've already got amazing sounding recordings. That's why you like them already. Yes. And you go, oh, well, how do I bring something to the table that is new?
Dude, I'm resonating so hard with this. Yeah, big time. So what do you find then, like, usually helps, not necessarily just with networking, but, you know, running your business, and what are the things that you've found over time that have, you know, made you better at it?
I really think it's just that networking thing. Yeah. That's one of what I really like about being in a band still, is that I'm able to be out there. If I wasn't doing that, I think I would have to actively go, okay, I got to go to gigs and talk to people and get in the mix with this whole community, because it's not going to come to you. You have to be proactive about it. And it really is just all about who you know, not what you know. You might be the best mix engineer in the world, but it's not going to come.
No one knows you, then knows about you, any of that stuff. Going to make your life hard.
But I mean, that is definitely the ultimate thing. The ultimate challenge is just how do you put yourself out there? And I mean, people find other ways. You know, social media is massive if you want to be that way, and you can, you know, highlight yourself online and you know, make YouTube tutorials or whatever, or doing stuff like this is amazing. You know, being able to have conversations with like-minded people. You know, I think that is definitely a massive part of it. But I am not an expert by any means. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Well, I mean, you're doing really well. Your stuff sounds awesome, and fuck, I love Press Club. I'm going to put it out there.
Oh, thanks so much.
Tell us a bit about, you know, actually, we'll start to wrap it up. One thing that I like to do as a kind of a final summary type deal is, can I have some of your favorite bits of advice for, first of all, producers and engineers that are in their first 5 years, and secondly, artists?
Yep. So for producers and engineers in their first 5 years, I think the main thing is, don't be scared of trying everything. Just experiment, spend as much time as you possibly can, just, you know, putting a microphone up in your house or whatever, and wherever you can, you know, plug a microphone in, just one SM57 and see all the different things that you can do with that. Like, there's just so many possibilities. And I think these days it would be trickier. Like, we were kind of lucky that we didn't have as much information. It's like, it's a double-edged sword. There's so many tutorials out there, and you can totally school yourself online. But we had to learn just by doing. And that can be really useful, I think. Because you just will speed up that process times 10, rather than just going, oh, this guy told me that this works this way, so I'm going to do it that way forever.
And then not knowing why it doesn't.
Exactly. So that's one thing, is just, you know, be constantly creative in terms of like trying new things, try different microphones, try different amplifiers. That's the tricky thing these days about DIing everything, is like, yes, you can try them, but if you try them in real life, it's different. So if you can put yourself in a situation where you can be in a studio and be able to experiment with a lot of different musical instruments and microphones, preamps, compressors, that is very useful early on, I think.
Love it.
But also the plugins are there and they are modeling the same thing. So just experiment as much as possible.
As love it. And then I guess for artists as well.
For artists, that's a tricky one. I don't know. It's a really hard time to be an artist, I think. Like, but I think organize as many shows with your friends as you can. Bring that community spirit back.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I'm sort of battling with at the moment is like the music industry in Australia feels it's almost like everyone now understands it. The barriers between like what does a booking agent do, what does a manager do, what does a record label do, have all been demystified. But we've also kind of lost that sense of it's really fun to just book a show and do it with your mates. It's always like, well, what's in it for me? You know, how much are we going to get paid? It's
big facts, man. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I hope that that's just a byproduct of me being a little bit older and doing it for a long time. I really hope that's not the case for younger artists coming up now. I hope that they know you can just book a show at the old bar and put like 5 bands on and don't worry about it. Just have a good time.
Have a good time.
Go on a tour, organize a tour. Like I know the thing is it costs heaps of money now, but
that's it. Yeah.
Jump in a car with your mates and drive up to Sydney and play a show. Like
But I think it's important that you mention that it is really expensive because then it comes down to being strategic about how you spend your money. You know, if you can, and this is something that I don't see enough people doing, is to take the time to plan stuff out. And like, you know, spend a day with your bandmates and literally just come out with all the things that could go wrong and write them all out and go, okay, well, how do we avoid that then? What do we need to spend money on? Like we need to spend money on maybe hiring a car if we don't have one that's big enough, petrol, you know, how do we sell merch? All these little questions that figure it out before the tour if the money is an issue.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
I think that also raises another kind of piece of advice I'd give is don't be afraid to reach out to people that you look up to. Kind of be surprised by how many people are willing to give you advice like I think there's a lot of people that will not respond, but you know you might send out 10 Instagram messages or whatever, and all it takes is one person that you admire to respond, and they go, cool, like this is what we did, you know, it's awesome. Like everyone has been in that position themselves, so all it takes is that one person to remember and be generous enough with their time to say like, oh, I'm going to actually give you some advice and or help you out, or maybe we'll remember you for our next tour that we're doing or whatever, you know. Like that is so important. You never know. And if you don't try it, you know, it's never going to happen. Like you know what. You miss the
100% of the shots you don't take. Everyone knows that
it's a cliche, but it's like,
true.
But it's so easy to just go like, I won't bother. Like, why would they ever respond, or why would they ever be interested, or they've got management or whatever. There might be someone in charge of that account still that will see it and go like, well, yeah, cool. Like, they've been bold enough to send me a message. Like, I'll check them out. They might really like your music.
And don't be afraid to follow up.
Yeah, totally.
That's a huge thing.
They might just miss it.
Yeah, exact.ly.
So it's everyone's swamped like these days.
You know? It can't hurt. It can't hurt. You're not going to piss someone off by asking them one extra time. Hey,
and it's obviously all about the language you use when you communicate. You know, you're not being like, yo, what's up? Like, book us on your tour. It's like, obviously, if you have humility and come at it the right way, then it might work out. I love it. Nice one. Well, thank you. What do you got coming up? What's this year? We're in 2024, people. I know. What's this year? I'm going on a holiday because I need one badly. We were pretty busy last year. And I still managed to make a couple of records in there as well, which I'm stoked about. Unreal. I mean, next thing for me on the short term is another album with Press Club. So a lot of songwriting, a lot of production stuff. Exciting. And tours, more tours overseas again. But I mean, I really want to just make more records this year. I feel like I was sort of just kind of dipping my toe back in after COVID, finishing up a lot of jobs that like hung over during that time. And now I'm just keen to just get back in the studio with people and more co-writes. It's been super fun. I've been doing that a lot, like writing songs with people. Hopefully another couple of full-length albums. Like, awesome. I feel like it's tricky to do more than a few in a year, I find. They're big undertakings. But I like working on albums. So, I think that hopefully is coming. I need to follow my own advice and not be scared to reach out to people.
We all?
I mean, more studio stuff and
awesome.
Yeah, more songwriting. I'm
fantastic. Keen. Love to hear it. Well, thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome, Stu.
It's been awesome. And thanks to everyone for checking this out. Here's the spiel. If you haven't yet, make sure you're following us or subscribing on whatever podcast platform you are listening to or watching this on. Please share this around. That's how we can spread the word about this podcast with all of our awesome guests that I like to have on and chat to and share all this educational content with everyone. It's a passion of mine. Hopefully, if you like it enough, you can share it around and other people can hear about it. So thanks again for your time. Appreciate it. And I'll see you next time on What's That Sound podcast. Thanks for listening to What's That Sound. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.